Modern Love, the podcast, is supported by...
Produced by the iLab at WBUR, Boston.
From the New York Times and WBUR Boston, this is Modern Love. Stories of love, loss, and redemption. I'm your host, Meghna Chakrabarty. We all hope to meet the right person. The thing is, that's not enough. You've got to meet the right person at the right time. Well, when she was in college, Karen Kaplan knew that, and she was worried that she'd met the person she wanted to end up with, but met that person too early. She writes about it in her essay, Let's Meet Again in 5 Years. It's read by Regina King, who won an Academy Award last year for her performance in If Beale Street Could Talk. She's starring in HBO's Watchmen, airing now on Sunday nights.
When I told Howard that we should meet again in 5 years to see if we were meant to be together, I thought I was just being practical. My idea was less about romance than hedging our bets. I was only 18 then, a freshman at Cornell, and he was barely 21. We had dated since September, and now it was spring. Soon, we would be headed back to opposite coasts, he to San Francisco and me to suburban New Jersey. The impending separation was forcing us to reevaluate. Our dorm room conversation went something like this. Me. I think finding the one is a matter of person, place, and time. What if we're both the right person, but this is the wrong place and time? We'd miss our chance and regret it. Him. So, are you saying we should stay together? Me. No, I don't want to marry the first guy I'm serious about. I'm saying, let's give ourselves a second chance. Let's meet in 5 years. I'll be 23 and you'll be 26. We'll see if we want to get back together. Howard agreed. We settled on meeting at the New York Public Library near the Uptown Lion at 4 p.m. on the first Sunday in April, 5 years from that spring. We wrote our pledge on a dollar bill, tore it in half, and gave each other the half we'd written on. Meeting in a public place would minimize any unwanted intimacy if things felt awkward. 4 o'clock made sense because we could start with a drink, and if things went well, we could proceed to dinner and go from there. If things weren't going well, we could go our separate ways. The New York Public Library was a sentimental choice. As English majors, we had spent a lot of time around books, and it was an easy landmark to find, one that was likely to still exist in 5 years, unlike a restaurant or bar. Although the first Sunday in April was our original choice, I soon realized that it could fall on Easter, and my mother, a firm Catholic, would never abide my heading into New York City that day. We'd be having a family celebration. So, Howard and I took back our half-dollar bills, crossed out April, wrote May, and handed them back to each other. And then we failed to break up. In fact, we stayed together that summer and through the whole next school year. It wasn't until the next semester, when he took a leave of absence and lived in Manhattan, that our relationship finally ended. I started seeing someone else. He found out, and that was that. We had 3.5 years before our meeting. I used that time well. I had relationships, flings, crushes. With a few of those men, I wondered, is he the one? For various reasons, the answer was never yes. Might it have been yes if Howard and I didn't have our date planned? Maybe, maybe not. In any case, most of my interactions with men, whether short or long-lasting, only strengthened my sense that Howard probably was the one and that I had been prudent to arrange our second chance. A part of our agreement that didn't make it onto the dollar bill was that we would tell no one. A rule I promptly forgot. At some point, I told my best friend. She thought the plan was creative, but felt bad for the guy I was seeing at the time. I also told my mother, which was a mistake. At the 5-year mark, I was living in Minneapolis. I was in a relationship that had been staggering along for months. As for Howard and me, we hadn't spoken or communicated at all for a couple of years. I vaguely knew of his whereabouts from mutual friends, but this was before cell phones, the internet, and email, a bygone era where you could actually lose touch with people and not know how to contact them even if you wanted to. That's what happened with us. Nevertheless, a few days after that first Sunday in May, I flew home to the Jersey suburbs for a visit with my mother. I planned to head into the city for the weekend. My sister had an apartment on the Upper West Side, and it would be nothing unusual for me to stay with her because I always did when I visited. But my mother kept suggesting an alternative plan. She argued that it would be better to go into New York when my sister wasn't working. As a restaurant employee, she was busiest on weekends. No, I said, I have to go in this weekend. I'm meeting Howard on Sunday. That stopped her. I didn't know you two were still in touch. We haven't been, I said, but we agreed to meet on the first Sunday in May this year, so I have to be in the city. When did you make this agreement? 5 years ago, I said. Oh my God, 5 years ago? Are you out of your mind? Doesn't he live in California? He's not gonna fly all the way to New York for this. Yes, he will. I'm sure he'll be there. While I was on the train into Manhattan, my mother called my sister and urged her to keep me from following through, fearing I'd be heartbroken when Howard didn't show. When I arrived, my sister said, "You're trying to live your life like a movie. Real life doesn't work like that. He's not even going to remember, much less travel 3,000 miles. You're setting yourself up for big disappointment." I disagreed. She had to work that afternoon and evening, so I was quite happily on my own for the walk from the Upper West Side to Midtown. A few minutes before 4 p.m., I found myself standing across the street from the library, scanning the small crowd in front, when suddenly I saw Howard heading toward the library steps. We saw each other, smiled, and waved. I crossed the street, and we hugged in front of the Lion. Fortitude, I learned later. Then sat down on the steps and started talking. Our conversation lasted 2 days. Then Howard caught a plane back to California. It wasn't immediately happily ever after for us. I had to extricate myself from the relationship with the other guy. Howard and I also had to figure out how we were going to live in the same city. That fall, I moved to the Bay Area for a couple of months on a work assignment. A few months later, he moved to Minneapolis, where we stayed for 2 years before moving to New York. And yes, once we were back east, we married. I still resisted calling our story romantic. Friends who had heard the story tended to exaggerate the details, saying things like, "And you didn't see each other for 10 years?" Actually, it was a 5-year plan, and it was only 3 years that we were fully out of touch. Or they'll say, "And you always knew." No, that was the whole point of the agreement. We didn't always know. Even after the meeting, it took a while for us to move in together. When we moved to New York, we agreed we would have to see how things worked out with jobs before making any promises. What is true is how the story has helped sustain our relationship through times of trouble. I would have hated to end the story with, "Unfortunately, it didn't work out." With a story like that, of course we had to stay together. A romantic past, we discovered, can help keep you belted in place until you find equilibrium. Still, I insisted the story was about foresight and prudence, not romance. I only shared the story with people who wouldn't think I was trying to live my life like a movie, who would know the story was about being smart in love, not starry-eyed. For years, I ended the story with, "I thought I was just being practical and giving us a second chance. It turned out to be a good plan." Well, the plan may have been practical, a friend said recently. But the fact that you both showed up, there's the romance. He was right. It was our complete faith in the other person, despite others' cautions, that defined the romance. We showed up for each other. We now have been married for 35 years. Howard still shows up for me, and I show up for him. The torn dollar bill is in a frame on his dresser.
That's Regina King reading Karen Kaplan's essay, Let's Meet Again in 5 Years. We'll catch up with Karen and Howard after the break. Karen Kaplan's essay was published earlier this year. She and her husband Howard live in New Jersey now, and they both joined us in the studio and brought us back to the day they reunited.
We sat down on the steps in front of the Lion, and right there started the conversation. And some of it was just, what have we been doing? And it was just delightful to just look at him in person. You know, that was part of it. And just to be that close again, be able to just hear each other. So it really did feel magic.
I remember what she was wearing, what she smelled like, and I remember being in the subway with her and feeling invincible, like nobody could touch me. And it was the greatest day of my life.
I don't remember having a sensation that he had changed. He was further along. So he was actually writing, not just talking about writing. He was actually having things published. There was maybe more confidence and certainly maturity than, when you're in college together. But absolutely the same person, just fuller maybe. And yes, more confident, more mature.
In those years that I wasn't with Karen, I felt the dollar bill as something both magical and malign at the same time. I started out ingloriously living with my parents. My dad was so accommodating. Like he would say, "You should just come live at home. You'll write. Everything will be there for you. You'll be comfortable." And it was very comfortable, too comfortable. And I had to kind of fight to get out. Fight myself. And really what drove me out of the house, finally, was, our appointment on the steps. I couldn't meet her and say, "Oh, I'm living with my folks still," for now. I couldn't do that. It would have been too shameful.
I think if I hadn't had those years, I would always have just felt a questioning. Like, did I make the right choice? Was there someone else out there? Did I miss out just on the fun experiences that you have in relationships that don't end in marriage? I would have always felt that I cheated myself if I hadn't had some other experiences surrounding it.
All these years later, I go, wow, was that like the great adventure in my life? The getting of this wife. And I always felt like I was going to fight for this marriage. Because that story, was still sort of very present for me. I'm just not going to let this go. I'm not going to let this go.
That's Karen Kaplan and her husband Howard. They're both writers living in Summit, New Jersey. Daniel Jones, editor of the Modern Love column for the New York Times.
So many people in their 20s, a very common story is, this is too early to find love. Like, this is just too early. And there's this agonizing dilemma of being with someone who you think is the person for you, but you've got all these years to sort of waste first before you can make that decision. So I think part of the appeal of this piece was that fantasy of now is not the right time, but 5 years might be the right time. So let's meet again then. On the other hand, though, for all the fantasy of putting off reuniting for 5 years, I'm not sure this story could work today. With electronic communication and social media, I think it's very hard to lose touch with someone. Is that the romance? Not knowing and having it come through? And if so, I'm not sure we have that anymore.
And here's Regina King.
I chose this story because it gives me hope. I am a true romantic, I believe. And I'm also quite the control enthusiast. So reading this story, I related to a woman that's both like me. And it gave me hope that the control, enthusiastic individual can be the romantic and find love even when she's a woman that has gained a lot of wisdom. I won't say a woman of a certain age.
Thanks to Regina for reading this week's essay. You can see her now starring in HBO's Watchmen. Modern Love is a production of the New York Times and WBUR, Boston's NPR station. It's produced, directed, and edited by Caitlin O'Keefe. Original scoring and sound design by Matt Reed. Iris Adler is our executive producer. Daniel Jones is the editor of Modern Love for the New York Times and advisor to the show. The idea for the Modern Love podcast was conceived by Lisa Tobin. Special thanks to Julia Simon, Anya Stremian, and Mia Lee at the New York Times. Additional music courtesy of APM. I'm Meghna Chakrabarty. See you next week.